What's up, everybody? Today I wanted to talk about a couple of concepts that are related, very important when it comes to discourse in general, but especially any kind of discourse where persuasion is important in this day and age. The concepts are epistemic humility and epistemological conscience. Both of these are obviously related to the word epistemology. Epistemology is the study of how we know things, in juxtaposition to or in relation to the other field in philosophy called metaphysics, the study of what's real. So you've got metaphysics and you've got epistemology. What's real? And how do we know stuff? How do we know things is epistemology. How do we qualify knowledge claims? How do we weigh competing narratives and frames? How do we, say that, I know this thing for sure. Epistemology is complicated. It's not as complicated as it can be made out to be from time to time. Like, I once saw Werner Herzog, the director of a lot of documentaries, give a lecture at a university where he was using a lot of very naive relativist talking points, as though it's just, we live in a post-truth alternative fact era. He said philosophers have tried to figure out what truth is for thousands of years and they haven't made any progress. This is false. There's disagreement between philosophers, but what makes a philosopher is the fact that they have they have a commitment to the idea of truth. And if truth is never totalizable in the Levinasian sense of totalization, if truth is never totalizable, if with every revealing there's a concealing, something Heidegger would say, then yeah, it's going to be complicated. But in general, philosophers not only believe in truth, but have a fidelity to the concept of truth. And I think it's really important to point out that there are a few, not very many, generally speaking, agreed upon theories of truth, in the same way that there are, there's utilitarianism in ethics, and then there's deontology, and then virtue ethics. Those are the main three schools, and you can compare and contrast them, and a lot of people are kind of mixtures of those things. There are different theories of truth. We don't have to get into them right now. I'll talk about them more later. What matters for this conversation, though, is that, while Werner Herzog might have been wrong, he was appealing to a popular sentiment. It's definitely the postmodern condition of normies in the information age, to feel overwhelmed by too much information, to feel a knee-jerk, default-level skepticism about knowledge claims that seem counterintuitive and especially politically or religiously, ideologically in general, politically or religiously, ideologically motivated reasoning. So it's you're making some absurd sounding claim about what you think the given state of affairs is. It runs counter to what I think makes sense, and I can totally see that you have a huge political bias or a huge religious bias in why you would say that. And political or religious bias, when people think of ideological bias, what they're really thinking of is what, once again, normies tend to call tribalism these days. People are very suspicious of it. At the end of the day, they see that you're making an argument for a group that they're not a part of, and that they would have to change to become a part of, and they're not really interested in becoming a part of it, and they feel like you're basically trying to pitch them on something. They feel like you're trying to sway them, like they won't be valid unless they go along with it. And because people don't study epistemology in high school, usually even college, I mean, really, it's just one of like the 7 different areas of philosophy that people don't study, right alongside logic and ethics and philosophy, science, and religion and things like that. But because people don't study it, and people don't really have the tools of epistemology available for sifting through knowledge claims and getting a more nuanced critical position, people just kind of default into a sort of cynical distance. It's more of a cynical, ironic distance. This goes well with Big Bread Brains' most recent video on irony, postmodernism, and doomer memes. Highly recommend. I'll link it in the description. Do check it out. Big Bread Brains is an up and coming YouTuber. We had a fantastic 5-hour Twitch stream conversation that is available on my old salvage channel called Theory Plebe Copy Pasta. Wait, is that even there? No, it's just on the Twitch channel, Copy Pasta Agitprop. I'll link that conversation in the description as well. But anyway, all right, so what does any of this have to do with persuasion and life in this 21st century? Much less what are these concepts, epistemic humility and epistemological conscience? So epistemic humility is just having or at least performing a certain amount of critical distance from one's own from one's own most closely held or cherished beliefs. So it's like I am a huge fan of this, or I'm a huge, let's just say I'm a critic of capital, right? Well, then there's biases that come with that, and with biases, then there's going to be things that I don't see or that I'm averse to recognizing. And so, do I just go all in, become a complete ideologue, or do I maintain a healthy dose of, well, I could be wrong? So, I am saying that epistemic humility is either actual humility or at least the performance of humility, meaning you're not so full of yourself that you don't think you couldn't be wrong. You could be wrong. You're aware of that, and people can see that. Epistemological conscience is related in the sense that, a lot of people have ethical conscience. People who are super cynical and don't really know if they can say that they believe anything very confidently don't necessarily have epistemic conscience, because there's a lot of things that they take at face value. It just kind of comes down to what their preferences are. But epistemological conscience, if it's a strong, healthy conscience, just like a ethical conscience, means that you have a sense of obligation, you have a sense of responsibility, and that can kind of weigh on you as like a burden, like a burden. It pushes down on you. You feel like you'd be really messing up if you were to just go along with what people say, or repeat, baseless claims or hearsay. Most people have a lot of epistemic conscience closely tied into their ethical conscience when it comes to beliefs or statements that will harm other people, because a fundamental tenet of ethics is not causing unnecessary harm. And then I'll just use the concrete example, like the go-to. The case against the death penalty, like the main argument against the death penalty, often comes down to the fact that, look, 1 out of 10 people on death row are actually innocent, Better to save one innocent life and let the 9 other guilty people live than to murder an innocent person. At a statistical level, we're making decisions that absolutely murder people unjustly if we're for the death penalty. Now, you could use a Machiavellian argument to come back and say, yeah, but you discourage crime, and by discouraging crime, you save lives with the death penalty. That's arguably false. I've seen arguments against it, at least. Supposedly there's studies. If anybody knows a lot more about these arguments or cares, in the description in the comment section, go ahead and chime in. But this is kind of an aside from my real point, which is just that people feel that ethical conscience when it comes to the death penalty, and it's tied into epistemological conscience, because what it basically comes down to is we don't know. We really can't know for sure, and I'm not a judge or a jury, but if I was, having to make that decision would be serious business. And some people, because they are so ideological, they just shrug off that obligation, that weight of responsibility, and they just go along and they say whatever their little group in their little echo chamber is already saying. It's if you're trying to persuade other people, then you don't want to do what we call preaching to the choir. Preaching to the choir is where you have your back to the actual audience and you're just speaking to the people who are already committed to your cause. But persuasion and outreach requires acknowledging that, and I'm claiming that here, let me do my Žižek impression. I claim that epistemological conscience is necessary for reaching people, generally just anybody who's not in your group, in a society that is heavily relativistic, and where there's a lot of ironic and cynical detachment, where people think that they are non-ideological, but they see you as ideological. People are going to be super skeptical. So when I see people who come guns blazing, demanding that you say or do things that would show beliefs, and they don't seem to realize that a lot of us, before we'll make positive statements or affirmations about belief, have to get there in good conscience through a process of reasonable discourse, consideration, time away from others in solitude, literally reflecting, sometimes over the course of years. These things don't happen overnight. And when you feel like someone's trying to pressure you, and it kind of has this, well, I can write you off if you're not going to get on board attitude, it's alienating. It's alienating, and while it might work for you to win a person here and win a person there, how many people are you ostracizing implicitly in the process? And if you're desperate and your tactic mainly works for already true believers or just dupes, people who are easily duped by ideology, then what kinds of people are you filtering out, and what kinds of people are you gaining? It seems like what you might be doing is building an army of people who aren't very reflective and don't really feel a sense of obligation and fidelity to truth, who'll just kind of go along with whatever they're being pressured to say. And who are the people you're losing along the way? You're losing a lot of people who are free thinkers. You're losing a lot of people who have a healthy dose of epistemological conscience, which I claim is very, very important to maintaining a healthy ethical conscience. So I hope that all makes sense, but if it doesn't, just go ahead and leave me a comment. By the way, the lecture, I gave it that on campus a couple days ago. It will be published tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Take care.